You're listening to the Rejection Diaries. My name's Stuart White, struggling writer, biology teacher, and dad of two. This is a podcast that has been started to explore and share the journey of an unpublished writer from the raw beginnings as a fledgling novelist to the point of sending to and being rejected by agents. I'll discuss the delirious highs and the crushing lows of this rollercoaster journey and give personal experience and anecdotes from my decade of writing and having my work rejected. This will be an honest account with very little censored, and I hope that you'll be able to relate to much of it, and that in turn it will bring you some comfort that you're not alone in this struggle. We write because we love it. We put ourselves out there because we are brave. Rejection is tough, but not writing and sending out our work is tougher. So let us begin. Hello and welcome to the very first episode of the Rejection Diaries. My name's Stuart White. And for those of you who know me well, you'll understand why I've decided to do this particular podcast and focus on this particular aspect of the writing journey. And I guess the best place for us to start on this first episode is to talk a little bit about my writing journey to date in truncated and very brief form, because it's been a long, torturous and arduous one. I started writing more seriously in 2010 when I suffered a really serious knee injury playing rugby. Until that point, I'd been very focused on rugby as my main sort of pastime out with work and so on, and loved it. I enjoyed it so much. It consumed a lot of my time, train a lot and so on. And for me, when I got the injury, I had this void in my life, not just in terms of the time, but in terms of something I had passion for and I could get myself buried in and spend, as I like to do, lots of hours obsessing over something. And without the rugby in my life, I decided that I was going to try something that I'd been thinking about my whole life, but never been brave enough really to start and to give it a go. And that was to write and to try writing a novel. So I actually started off by drawing a map of a world that had been slowly building in my imagination for a number of years, and that I'd wanted to write a story about. A little bit of a throwback and a tribute to the novels I read as a kid, the likes of Lord of the Rings and Narnia and so on, where you would have those illustrated maps and the inside cover of the book, which always excited me when I found a book like that. I remember as an adult discovering the Terry Brooks novels as well, and they had those lovely hand-drawn maps inside, and for me anyway, as a big fantasy and science fiction reader, those are the ones that excited me the most. So yeah, I decided to have a go at writing a novel in 2010. Managed to finish it within the best part of just over a year, I think it was in the end. I was doing it also while working full time as a teacher and so on, so I was just doing it in my evenings and doing it bit by bit. But I got there in the end, only to discover when I finished it that middle grade novels, which is what I wrote or I thought I'd written, should not be 102,000 words. And the only reason I actually discovered that, and I'm showing here my lack of initial research when I began, was when I got the rejections from the agents. So I finished the novel, did some editing, but again at the time, my perception of editing a novel was very different to now. And what I did essentially was a spell check, a sentence check. You just made sure that the text actually made sense, as opposed to the sort of deeper developmental editing that I would do in a novel now. And yes, so sent it out, got rejected, form rejections from every single agent that I sent it to that first time, and a few of them pointed out some of the fundamental faults and flaws with my work, such as obviously the length that does not correspond to that age category. It was far too long. The fact I had one quite scathing criticism, which was that it felt too close in terms of theme and even plot to Lord of the Rings, which as a child was my favourite book, and it maybe was a bit more fan fiction impersonation of that novel rather than something completely unique that I'd come up with. And even to this day, I still kind of cringe a little bit thinking back on it. I don't think the experience was necessarily all bad. I think I learned a huge amount from it. I am glad that I started, and I wrote that bad novel just to get me in the habit of it, and also just to prove to myself that I could write and finish a novel, which for the majority of people who begin is actually the biggest challenge. I can't imagine what the figures are, but I would guess that the number of people who begin a novel who then finish it is not a high percentage. It's obviously a really challenging art form, and the level of persistence and perseverance that is required to complete it is very high. So for anyone listening out there who has completed a novel, then you have already won in that sense. You've proven that you can do it, and that is so important. And we'll talk a lot about celebrating small successes throughout this series, and that is one of the big ones. If you can finish a draft, then there's no reason why you can't go on and write another book and another one and get better with each one, as long as you're willing to put in the time and effort to get that draft done. But as I say, for me personally, the first book was very much a learning experience. I can't remember off the top of my head the number of rejections from that first book. I'm guessing it would be in the 30 to 40 range, as I went through the writers and artists yearbook and sent it to every children's agent that I could find in there. And of course, in 2010, there was less online with regard a list of all the agents and so on who you could send to. So I remember that being quite a long process too. But obviously a very beneficial one, because that was the basis for me saying, okay, I've written something which is not going to be taken on by an agent. It's probably never going to be published. I'm probably never going to revisit it and try and rewrite that one. I don't think that'd be a good idea. But it was the sort of springboard for me to catapult myself into my second book, which was again, it was a book that was probably YA in terms of tone and theme and content and so on, but was far too short. Probably, I think it was about 50,000 words in the end for a sci-fi YA. So it was on the shorter end. So I had kind of done the opposite from what I'd done with that first novel, and gone too short with the word count. But again, I finished it, and I definitely spent a lot more time in the developmental edit phase of that book. I did a few courses during that time as well. I learned as much as I could about the craft of writing and so on, and it was definitely a better book. But I sent it to the agents, and again, the majority of them sent me back polite rejections. This isn't for us and so on. However, and this was the thing I think that kept me going at this stage, because I think if I'd only received rejections on that novel, then maybe there wouldn't have been a third novel. But I got one agent who emailed me back to ask for I think it was the full novel. I think I'd sent in the first 10 pages as part of the initial submission, and they'd asked for the full novel. And for me, that was huge. And I, of course, made the rookie mistake of thinking I've had a full request and getting carried away with the excitement of it and the hope that potentially this was going to lead to perhaps signing with an agent, and obviously the dream, which is to go on and have your work published. Unfortunately, after I guess it was maybe 4, 5, 6 months, it was certainly quite a long time. She came back to me and said, "Actually, it's not for me. We like this and that." And actually, I think the reader for the agency, wrote me a small report about it, and gave me some tips on areas they thought I could improve upon, which I thought was very generous. And it was very appreciated as well. I think that I went back and had another go at writing that story based upon that, and it never amounted to anything more substantial. But the boost that I got from receiving the full request, the boost that I got from that small amount of feedback from the reader, was enough to keep me going into writing book 3. Now I think that was in 2014. I began book 3, which to this day actually was one of my favourite things to write. The first draft of that came out very easily. I wrote it over the space of a few months. I had a very clear idea and vision for it. The main character, was one that I could find very relatable, and therefore I think I put a lot of myself into it, and was very invested in both the character and the story, but then obviously the outcome from sending that one out. Now, in 2014, I actually used that as part of my portfolio to apply and do my masters, which I got accepted for based on that novel. I did that at Glasgow Uni 2014-15. I did that just in the evenings. It was remote, while I was working still as a teacher at that time, and spent that year. I learned so much about writing, about the industry. They teach you about that in the course, about different forms as well of writing. We did a lot of short fiction, flash fiction, poetry. I even tried songwriting, a whole range of things, which was really good for me to experiment with my writing and see where my relative strengths and weaknesses and so on were. And eventually, obviously, I finished the masters, and it was really useful. And that story that I'd focused upon during my masters was book 3, and I sort of polished it. I finished my masters. I applied for the Curtis Brown Writing for Children course that is tutored by the brilliant Catherine Johnson. And I got accepted onto that just after my masters. So I decided to work on book 3 during that course. Now, the Curtis Brown course, obviously, it's reasonably expensive to do, and I remember having to use my credit card to afford it at the time. I didn't, I'm not a particularly well off person in general, but I at that particular time I'd just gone through my masters, which I paid for. As well, which is a few £1,000s and so on. Anyway, long story short, I eventually managed to somehow pay for the course and did it. And I'm so glad I did, because I met 14 other, there was 15 in the course, there was 14 other brilliant writers of children's fiction. And until that point, I hadn't really invested myself and got involved within any writing community, either online or in courses or in groups, and that was the first sort of point for me where I realised that writing was far better when you were involved in a group with other people who you could share the experiences with, who you could share work with and get great feedback from, whose work you could read and you could see similar progress, from people at a similar stage from you, and so on. And it was so useful to me. I loved the 12 weeks or so of that course. The 3 months, it was brilliant. Catherine was amazing. She is such an insightful writer and tutor, and she gives you such valuable tips, and she really encouraged me with that third book. I remember having the one-to-one tutorial with her, and how she described how the book made her feel, and the praise that she gave me and so on was something that certainly kept me motivated and going with my writing for the best part of the next couple of years. So I have a huge amount to thank her for. in that regard. And my course mates as well, we ended up forming a little group. We called ourselves the Scribblers originally enough, and we still actually have a Facebook group that we made after the course, where we all keep in touch. From that group, a number of them have gone on to get agents and be published. Like Cynthia Murphy and Lisa Bradley, Michelle Kenny, all published now. And well, as I say, most of us still keep in touch to some extent. One of my good friends, Lorna, as well. I'm actually in two writing groups with her now, the way it's worked out. And it's such a small, tight knit, but very valuable and lovely community that we have with other children's writers. And that's something that I'd say that if you're listening to this and you've never really got involved with before, then I would recommend it absolutely. Find whoever you can, whether it's through just connecting with people on Twitter. If you start engaging with people who follow Write Mentor, for example, you're probably going to be onto a decent bunch. And the more you connect with them, the more you can chat about writing and so on. And you might find someone who you hit it off with, and you can exchange work and form a critique partnership with, or even a small group if there's a few of you. As I say, that's how I found it. Another one of my writing groups was just through Twitter and through interacting on there. So very much worthwhile. But so back to my own journey, my rejection journey. Book 3 went out to agents as soon as I finished the Curtis Brown course. And I got a lot of interest for that one. Surprisingly as well, because I'd obviously gotten a lot of tumbleweed with books 1 and 2. So when book 3 got, I think I had an agent full. It was just before Christmas I sent it out, and I had an agent full request, within a couple of days. And then I nudged the other agents just to say, I've had a full request. This agent seems really interested. Blah blah blah. And then I ended up, I think over the course of the next month or so, with about 18, I think it was, full requests from all the various agents that I'd sent it to, which was amazing. And the feeling I got at that time was one of the highest I think that I've experienced in all my time writing. The excitement, the hope, all of that. And I just thought, surely of all these requests, someone is going to love the book enough to want to take it on and to try and sell it. So that was a very exciting time for me. And I just actually started a new teaching job at the time. And I remember not being able to focus as much as I should be on this brand new job, because I was so excited about the prospect of my book being picked up. Unfortunately, because it was so fast initially, all the requests and so on, I also got then the flurry of rejections just as quickly in return. And so I think by the end of January, at least half of those agents had been back in touch to say, I've read the full thing now, as much as we love the promise of the first 3 chapters and, et cetera, we don't think that we're going to be able to sell something like this at the moment. It was a dystopian YA novel, and they just didn't think the market was right. I remember, without name dropping any agents, I remember a few of them, and I remember their comments specifically saying, like 3 or 4 years before, they'd have possibly taken a punt with it, but at that stage there had been too much dystopian, and it wasn't selling because there was just so much of it on the bookshelves already. So that was a blow for me. And actually, that was the one and only time that I've had a phone call to reject me. One of the agents that I submitted to sent me an email saying, what's your phone number and when's a good time to call, blah, blah, blah. So, of course, and I think it was reasonable that I thought that way. Even now, I think it was reasonable. I thought, well, this is the call, the famed, mythical call that all writers dream about, where an agent calls them and says they love their book and they want to offer you representation and, we're going to do great things together. However, when I received the phone call, and I remember distinctly where I was and when. It was on a Tuesday evening before a parents' night. So I was staying late at school. I was there, I think it was about 5:30. Parents' night started at 6. So I took the call, and the agent was lovely, kept, saying really lovely things about my writing, blah, 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 but then said, but we're not going to take it on. I remember being absolutely crushed by this. Despite all the lovely things that they'd said about my book and so on, I was so crushed. And I remember just coming off that phone call and just like sitting down in my chair in my lab and saying, how am I possibly going to speak to all of these parents for the next 3 hours when I'm feeling like this? But I managed to somehow get myself through that evening. The parents were probably thinking, what is wrong with him? What is wrong with this teacher? He's absolutely miserable. And I got myself through the evening and picked myself up eventually. It took me a little while. I remember sulking a little bit. I think between sort of the February and I think it was the April, I spent a long time just going over and over in my head, why am I doing this? Why am I writing? This is a cruel way to spend all of my spare time. And eventually I got to the point though where I came to the acceptance phase of loss, and I decided that was the manuscript. It was gone now. It had moved on, and it was time for me to move on to the next thing. And I came up with my next book idea. I began writing it, and again, I went through quite a good phase at that point. I was able to write this next one quite quickly. The idea came. I spent maybe a year and a half in total on it, writing it, then revising, and I did so much more revision on this one because I was sure that if I just kept developing it, revising it, doing multiple drafts, making it as good as I could make it, that I would avoid the repeat of book 3 and the agony and so on. And I ended up with a whole pile of rejections from book 3 that said something along the lines of, not for us this time, but please send us anything else that you write. Which is, many of you will recognise as a common thing for agents to say, but I don't think they say it to everyone necessarily. So, it's a good thing. And so I did. I sent book 4 to all of the agents who'd asked for it. I got a good amount of interest, not as many requests with book 4 as I did with book 3, which I was disappointed with at the time because I thought I'd written a stronger book, but I guess that's just the way it goes. And they got back to me again over the course of a few months, and ultimately it was all rejections. So what I did was I sat down, and I think I paid, I can't remember, a couple of editors to look over it and do developmental edits, give me a report, let me know where this manuscript's let me down, because even if I wasn't going to sign with an agent for this one, I wanted to know what I could develop and improve before I wrote my next novel, because at this point, morale was low, energy was low. I was really questioning it, I've got to be honest, and I was finding it difficult. So I got the reports, I worked again in the manuscript, worked on it, and then I was going to send it out for a second round of querying to agents, because obviously by this point my list was quite out of date, and a lot more agents were appearing, or were coming onto my radar at least. They might have been there for a while, but I'd missed them. And I was going to do a second round with that. And actually, I entered a pitch contest. I can't remember the name of it now, but it was online, and you basically put your pitch for your book on it, and agents browsed it. It was on a website rather than Twitter, but they browsed it, and if they made a comment, you sent them over your chapters and so on. And an agent did that. A US agent did that with my pitch for book 4. I sent it over to them, and I'm still sort of working on it and editing it at this point. And I very quickly got asked for the full, and then very quickly, within a week or so, had been offered representation by this agent, which was great. I was at the time, I was like, this is amazing, and I hadn't actually sent it out to the round the next round of agents as I'd planned to. And so it's quite difficult because I found myself in this position where I would have liked other people to consider it as well, and I didn't know what to do. So I sent them out anyway to the agents, but stating that I'd had an offer. Now, in hindsight, I don't know if I would do that. Knowing the industry better, knowing the agents better, knowing people better, just knowing a lot more about things, it's unfair to email an agent saying you've already have an offer of rep. I think it's different if you've queried them at the same time as the other agent who's offered, but I think just to do that is unfair because you expect them to turn around the reading on that within 2 weeks. And that's the general given time that you're allowed to think about an agent offer. And yeah, I think I can't remember. People were lovely. The agents were all lovely, of course, but I just think many of them just said, I'm going to have to bow out of this one. I just don't have the time, which is understandable. Agents are hugely busy. Reading submission is not. It's probably something they quite enjoy doing, but it's not something they actually spend most of their time doing and spend very little of it. I know from speaking to them, it's very much a evening and weekends and on the commute to work type of part of their job. So, yeah. Anyway, I ended up accepting that offer that I had. Going through a round of edits with them, sending it out to some US publishers because it was a US agent, getting some interest but no offers, and eventually getting an offer from a smaller press in the US. And again, I thought, well, this is great. I'm going to be published, blah, blah, blah. I ended up accepting it and going with that publisher. Then I spent a bit of time working on new ideas and new novels and so on. I was excited about the next things. I thought I'm agented. I'm going to be published soon. And this was back in 2017, going into 2018, and I was very excited, as you'd expect me to be. Then I started looking more closely at, and this is something that all authors do, and it's something you should really try and avoid. I started looking around me at other authors who were due to be published. I actually joined a group of to be published in 2018 authors, and I was January 2018, 11th of January 2018, I was supposed to be published, and I started looking at them getting very, very advanced cover reveals. Their work been put up on Amazon, Goodreads, and so on, like months and months in advance. Big pre-order campaigns and so on. 4 rounds of edits. Developmental edits, line edits, proofreads, copy edits. Like they were going through the full range. And I remember looking and thinking what I had wasn't as good. I got a bit of I guess, book jealousy, because what they were getting seemed to be much better than what I was. And I remember, for me, the final straw being getting in touch with the publisher and saying, it's 3 months to publication or 4 months to publication, whatever it was at the time, and I haven't received any edits yet. There's no mention of the book online, no idea what the cover's going to be like, etc., etc. And the reply was, oh, the book's fine. It only requires a few minor edits, and the rest of it's all in hand. And I remember just not feeling at all satisfied by that. And even without the comparison, I don't know if I'd have been particularly satisfied with that. But with watching a lot of good friends get what they were getting through their experience with the publishers and so on, I just didn't feel right for me. I remember asking, because they're a US-based one, about how likely it would be someone in the UK could buy the book and so on. And there was just very little guarantees that the experience would be what I hoped it would be. And again, we're talking a few years ago now, so again, with my experience now, I would maybe approach that and think about it differently, but that's how I felt at the time. And so eventually I decided to not go ahead with the book being published. I also decided that a US agent, again, and this experience is going to be different for everyone, and I'm not suggesting that. And the agent and the publisher were both really nice. There was no malice or horribleness about the whole experience. However, it just wasn't right for me, and I think that's okay, and I think that's something that most people can respect, is that someone can make a decision like that. Just, it didn't live up to my expectations. Maybe nothing ever will. This is the thing that also worries me. Maybe if I get all the things that I saw other people getting, I might still not be satisfied. It's the whole Hamilton song, isn't it? You'll never be satisfied. That kind of thing where yeah, maybe I'm just reaching for that ever elusive space unicorn that's just always out of reach and barely exists, and you'll just never get to. So I parted company with the publisher and agent at the time, um, with regret. I explained the situation to them, and again, to be fair to them, they were very, very good with me about it. Very amicable, very professional, and I moved on just to the next book, to the next idea, and so on. However, I actually got quite ill at that point. Spent the best part of a year and a half. I had radiation treatment and so on, and I spent the best part of a year and a half not doing an awful lot of writing. Before then, picking up what was the fifth book that I queried, although not the fifth book that I've written, but I'll talk about that maybe another time. And I started in 2019, and with a lot of hope and a lot of promise. I was really excited about this book. I got stuck in. I started writing it. I submitted it to Undiscovered Voices 2019, and was delighted to reach the long list for that and get an honourable mention in the anthology eventually. But ultimately didn't make the cut for the anthology itself. So again, an example there of the extreme high of being selected initially, and then the extreme low that comes. And actually, the lows can sometimes be even lower from the rejection after reaching the first stage, the long list. If I hadn't reached that at all, I'd have been gutted. But maybe I'd have been down here gutted and stayed down here. Whereas sometimes going up and getting that high and then coming back down, you plummet even further. I guess it's a bit like as a diabetic, my blood glucose levels, which I always feel worse if they're going all the way up and then back down than I do if they're just staying like that all day. And I guess there's a degree of truth that that could be applicable to the writing journey as well in terms of our highs and lows. But yeah, I enjoyed writing that book, and obviously in March this year I decided to send that out to agents once again, on in the back of having done reasonably well in the Undiscovered Voices competition for the anthology. And well, I think if any of you follow me on Twitter, you'll have seen the thread that I composed, monologuing the various stages that I went through. The excitement and the hope initially when you send it out to all the agents. You try and pretend, oh, it's fine. I'm going to be cool about it. I'm going to not be checking my inbox every day and so on. But you do. You obsess. And I think I can't remember. I spent the first few days anyway refreshing, and I actually had a couple of nice replies which were lovely from the agents, just saying considering the work, but we're totally snowed under at the moment, and that's true. And even now we're sort of a couple of months on and still haven't heard an initial response or rejection from about half of the agents that I sent my work to. So that's just the way it is. It's a busy time for them. And I accept that, and I think as writers we do need to accept that we'll send our work out there, and it won't always be replied to. It might not even make the agent's desk who you're sending it to. I know a lot of agencies use readers now, again, is understandable with the number of submissions they get, and there's a whole other range of reasons why they might not get back to you from business, just to it not being their particular cup of tea. With Ghosts of Mars, my fifth book there, some full requests, but ultimately rejections. Some full requests which I've still not heard from, and as I say, some just complete silence so far. It's tricky hanging on at the moment. I have mentally parked it, I think, and moved on. For the sake of my own sanity, I think you need to do that when you've sent your work out. I think if you linger too long, you can spend 6 months, a year, and so on, just holding on to that hope, and hope really can be bad for you if you stick to it and don't allow yourself to gradually let it filter out. Especially if the hope just suddenly disappears, like i.e. you get the rejections and you go from having lots of hope to none at all. For me, if you just let it sort of gradually peter over time, when you do get the rejections, you're hopefully down here and it's not as big a blow. Or who am I kidding? It's always a blow, isn't it, when you get a rejection? But yeah, anyway, we'll see what happens over the coming weeks and months with that. But on to book 6 now. Very excited about that. More than halfway through now. I hope that I've written something that's a bit more, and not purposefully done this, but hopefully a bit more to the agent's likes. The Ghosts of Mars books got a lot of feedback, which was too sci-fi. No, I'm not really into something that heavy, etc. Which is a real shame. I'd love for there to be more heavier STEM based sci-fi for middle grade, but maybe a time will come for it. But yeah, on to book 6 now, and trying to get that done, and so I can send it out again for another round of rejections by maybe by the end of the year or the start of next year. I would imagine by the time I finish the first draft, done a series of rewrites and redrafts, done the edits and so on. Will be entering all the competitions as well, as us unpublished and unagented writers like to do. Just to throw it in there, you never know if there's going to be a reader that absolutely loves just specifically your book. And that's all it needs. It's a cliche that is said a lot about you only needing one person to fall in love with your work, but it's absolutely true. And as someone who sees that a lot through the various things that I do with Write Mentor, it just does need that one stroke of luck, good luck, taste, and timing are the three elements I always think that are needed, as well as your own obvious novel telling skills as well. So yeah, I think that kind of gets us up to date now with my own journey. And sorry that's been a long one, and thanks for sticking with me if you're still here at the tail end of this. One thing I would say is, as we progress through this series and we discuss maybe the psychology of rejection, the ways the approaches and methods to bouncing back from it, ways to mitigate how tough it's going to feel, discussions with other novelists on how rejection has affected them, some uplifting stories as well from people who have faced a lot of rejection but then have eventually overcome it. Now, I know I've got a few sort of more cynical friends who might say, "Oh, I hate those stories. I hate it when someone says, oh, I get 50 rejections, but you've got to keep going," and so on. Because at the time, it can be so hard to keep going when the rejection first hits your inbox. So yeah, those stories are inspiring and amazing, but yeah, maybe not for every moment, especially just when you're in the raw stage and the rejection is still stinging a little bit. So that is me finishing up for episode 1. You've had the absolute lowdown on my writing journey so far. Very highlighted version. There's a lot more actually in there that even now I'm thinking I could have included, but we'll save that for another day. And we've got lots and lots of other opportunities to share these things, and in turn, hopefully for some of you to come on and chat to me and to also share your rejection journeys as well. So thanks for joining me for episode 1 of the Rejection Diaries. I hope that you have found the discussion today, what I've talked about, something that's relatable, something that maybe gives you some hope and encouragement, maybe something that does the very opposite, which I hope not, but you never know how people might react to hearing such torturous, difficult, hard journeys. But I do hope that at the very least you got something out of this, even if it's just something that you can put on the background while you're doing the hoovering. Okay, thank you for joining me for episode 1 of the Rejection Diaries. I'm Stuart White, and I'll see you next time. Keep submitting that work and keep getting rejected. I'll see you soon.